Hi, everybody. It's been 7 years since the worst financial crisis in generations spread from Wall Street to Main Street. A crisis that cost millions of Americans their jobs, their homes, their life savings. It was a crisis that cost all of us. It was a reminder that we're in this together, all of us. That's how we've battled back these past 6.5 years, together. We still have work to do, but together we prevented a second Great Depression. Our businesses have created nearly 13 million jobs over the past 64 months. The housing market is healthier. The stock market has more than doubled, restoring the retirement savings of millions. Americans of all stripes buckled down, rolled up their sleeves, and worked to bring this country back.
At this point, I see the U.S. economy as performing well. Domestic spending has been growing at a solid pace.
These 10 brands will disappear in 2016. With 24/7 Wall Street, we've compiled this list for the last 6 years. So what do we look at? Among the things are companies that may go bankrupt, companies that have lost most of their customers, companies that have a long history of declining sales and losses, and companies which have lost almost all of their market share. Each brand on this list suffers from at least one of these problems, and generally several. Looking at Smart Car, division of Mercedes, now selling less than 700 cars a month in the United States. American Apparel lost its founder, already gone bankrupt, down to 130 stores against competitors that have several thousand. OfficeMax, an interesting one, merged with Office Depot. The parent company takes the Office Depot name. That new company is being swallowed up by Staples. Pacific Sunwear, shrinking margins, losses, and the amount of money that they make per square foot in their stores is one of the worst in the industry. A&P, middle of last century, one of the largest companies in the United States and the largest retailer, simply lost out to many of the other large retail grocery operations and went into liquidation this year. Volkswagen's TDI, right at the top of most people's minds right now. This is the diesel portion of Volkswagen, almost 11 million recalls and causing huge losses for VW. US Air, another fascinating set of circumstances, merges with bankrupt American Airlines, and the board decides that American Airlines is the better brand, so gets rid of US Air. Ashley Madison, what a huge problem. Database is released everywhere on the internet, people being outed left and right. No reason for anybody to ever go back to this website and use it for cheating. Radio Shack had almost 5,000 stores at one point, really eclipsed by places like Best Buy, and now is completely gone. Some of these stores will become Sprint outlets. Sears, part of the merger between Kmart and Sears, both doing very badly. Parent company is going to have to pick one of those brands to survive and one to go away, and Sears is the weaker of the two.
British bank Standard Chartered has announced plans to slash 15,000 jobs after disappointing losses in the third quarter. The bank says axing the jobs is part of a major restructuring plan that will cost around $3 billion without elaborating. Standard Chartered is planning to raise over $5 billion in capital as it's struggling to return to growth. The decision comes after the bank reported a loss of $139 million in the third quarter. Following the report, Standard Chartered shares plunged over 6% on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, pushing up its stock value loss to 32% in the past year.
There are new developments in the scandal being called VatiLeaks. The Vatican is criticizing claims of financial mismanagement and Pope Francis's efforts for change in the church. The allegations are being released in two new books. One of them, called Merchants in the Temple, discusses division in the Catholic Church, where author Gianluigi Nuizzi says, "The Pope's men are lined up on one side, while on the other are his enemies, the defenders of the status quo, adverse to any and all change." That change started shortly after Pope Francis's election. The pontiff created a committee to evaluate the Vatican's finances. The new books claim the commission discovered misappropriation and virtually no accountability of how money was spent. Nuizzi talks about how even the most sacred rituals, costing millions of dollars, were tainted by corruption, like procedures for beatification and canonization. The second book, called Avarice, details a lavish lifestyle, like a $26,000 helicopter ride for the Vatican's then Secretary of State, later fired from his job by the Pope, whose efforts at cleaning up the Vatican may be helped by these revelations, as some experts explain.
There must be a cleanup of Vatican finances. So in a way, Pope Francis comes out looking really good.
But one claim that makes the church look quite bad is that $400,000 churches collected for charity went instead to pay for Vatican department expenses. The two books detailing controversies within the Catholic Church are to be released later this week. They focus on the struggle between the old and new guard. Two people have already been arrested, accused of leaking secrets about the Catholic Church.
The Vatican is bustling this week with news that an Italian public relations expert and a Spanish cleric were arrested for leaking confidential documents. Francesca Ciauchi reportedly blamed Monsignor Lucio Angel Vallejo Balda for the leak. The two are members of a commission set up by Pope Francis to study economic reforms. The pontiff set up the commission shortly after his 2013 election. The leak is one of the biggest internal scandals to hit his two-year papacy and is reminiscent of the VatiLeaks scandal, in which Pope Benedict's butler, Paolo Gabrielli, was convicted for stealing documents from the Pope's desk in 2012. Ciauchi was released on Monday and has pledged to cooperate fully in the investigation, while Vallejo Balda remains in custody.
For the last couple of years, this young woman has been denied full access to locker room facilities in the school simply because she is transgender. I think when you have been the subject of discrimination, when you have been the subject of discussion in which the superintendent of your school district suggests that you may not really be a girl, I think to have the weight of the federal government come down and say that your rights have been trampled and that they need to be respected is incredibly validating and incredibly inspirational.
By imposing this unrestricted access without any measure of expected privacy, We believe that that is not the right thing to do for our young people. There are private changing stations, and each of those individual stations would afford access into the locker room and opportunities to engage with peers in the locker room. At the same time, protecting matters of privacy that are very critical among teenage students. We continue to be very hopeful that we're going to be able to work toward a solution together that serves the best interests of all of our students, those who are transgender and those who are cisgender.
Houston's Proposition 1 bathroom ordinance.
The attacks on a Houston non-discrimination law were relentless and effective,
simply by claiming to be a woman that day,
helping turn out voters in an off-year election to defeat Proposition 1.
It took a number of people and a number of pastors from black churches, white churches, brown churches, everyone to stand up and say, Mayor, not in our city.
One of the biggest objections we had was the fact that this ordinance allowed biological males, even registered sex offenders, who on any given day identified as a female, to go into a female restroom, shower, or locker room. If that business owner said no, that business owner could be prosecuted. We thought that was just plain wrong. And Houstonians, I believe, felt that was just plain wrong.
This shows that the liberal leftist ideas of the Democrats, led by this mayor and led by Hillary Clinton, are going to be rejected, not just by Republicans, but by Democrats who came out against this. It's just common sense and common decency. We don't want men in women's ladies' rooms. This had nothing to do with equal rights. We already have equal rights guaranteed under our Constitution.
This was a campaign of fear-mongering and deliberate lies. Deliberate lies. This isn't misinformation. This is a calculated campaign of lies designed to demonize a little understood minority.
It can be really hard to understand about who transgender people are. And part of the reason for that is that most people have never met someone who's transgender. But I think that what's important is to keep in mind we are a part of these schools, we are part of your communities, we are part of your families. And although we may be different in some ways, what's most important is the things that we have in common.
I mean, we're the most diverse large city in the country. So many people from all backgrounds call Houston home that the outcome of this election shouldn't indicate, anything about our great city.
Ohio voters said no to legalizing recreational and medical marijuana. Jews' vote was 2-1 against the measure. It would have made Ohio the most populated state to allow general pot use. Adriana Diaz is outside the State House in Columbus with reaction to the vote. Adriana, good morning.
Good morning. Voters here in Ohio voted overwhelmingly against the constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana. The decision came after months of controversy and debate about the group backing the legislation.
This is a bump in the road.
Supporters of Issue 3, an initiative to legalize medical and recreational marijuana in Ohio, are regrouping after voters strongly shut down the measure on Tuesday.
Never have we seen a proposed amendment this detailed for a small handful of people.
State Representative Mike Curtin and other local lawmakers opposed the bill, saying it would create a marijuana monopoly in the state, giving control over production to a small handful of wealthy people, the financial backers of a pro-legalization campaign called Responsible Ohio. The law would have allowed them to grow marijuana exclusively at 10 privately owned locations.
My issue is not legalization of marijuana. My issue is not using the state constitution to carve yourself a business exclusive.
Even some supporters of Issue 3 were concerned about its economic model.
I was really initially excited about the amendments for marijuana until I got to research it a little bit and realized I'm not a fan of the monopoly situations.
Responsible Ohio is made up of 24 known investors, including former pop star Nick Lachey. The group outspent their opponents 20-1.
We have to assess what all of this means and see if there's a will on the part of folks to go forward.
Ohio Governor and Republican presidential candidate John Kasich applauded the decision, saying in a statement, at a time when too many families are being torn apart by drug abuse, Ohioans said no to easy access drugs.
Responsible Ohio says the only reason they went the route of having a small group of investors push to get this on the ballot is because marijuana bills here at the State House have stalled for the last 19 years. They said they'll likely try again next year.
Herbicide glyphosate is very effective at killing weeds. On a small scale, you probably spray Roundup or something similar in your garden to keep the weeds at bay. On a large scale, the U.S. Geological Survey says glyphosate was used on 300 million crops in 2012. The last year data is available. As you can see, the use of glyphosate has grown tremendously over the years. Now, back in June, the EPA said there is no convincing evidence glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. Should be good news, as endocrine disruption has been linked to cancer, fertility issues, and diabetes. A senior science fellow at Monsanto said, "I was happy to see the safety profile of one of our products was upheld by an independent regulatory agency." Funny he should use the word independent, as The Intercept found out of the 32 studies the EPA used to come to this conclusion, 27 of them are conducted or funded by industry. Many of them sponsored by Monsanto, a company that clearly has a vested interest in the outcome. Out of the 5 studies that were truly independent, 3 of them found out the chemical did pose a danger to the endocrine system. One study from the Department of Pharmacology at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul used lab rats to test glyphosate on the endocrine system and said Roundup may induce significant adverse effects on the reproductive system of male Wistar rats at puberty and during adulthood. Yet the EPA still says after all of these studies, there is no convincing evidence of potential interaction in mammals and wildlife. Monsanto says the EPA's assessment should give farmers and consumers added assurance about the safety of its product. I reached out to both Monsanto and the EPA about the funding of these studies. Monsanto got back to me and said they are actually required to provide studies to government agencies to evaluate product safety. And while some of these studies do come from Monsanto, many others are conducted by third-party scientists and labs. In the end, after looking at all the comprehensive data, EPA did rule that there was no conclusive connection between the herbicide and endocrine disruption.
How can you have an earthquake in Arizona? Well, guess what? They actually are fairly common. They're just usually out in the middle of nowhere where nobody ever feels them. So even though a lot of people don't actually know that they're there, we do have quite a few of them. 4-pointer, that might not be that strong, but the U.S. Geological Survey says 4.0 is pretty good and right up there as far as the highest, the biggest magnitude we've ever had in Arizona, which was a 5.6, and that was up near the Arizona-Utah border, but that was back in 1959. So 4.1 definitely shook up quite a few people around here, guys.
Certainly shows the power of the Earth.
Mother Nature is putting on quite the demonstration in central Wyoming with something people are calling the crack.
Certainly they're a curiosity when you see a crack that size and a slide that size. You know, most people think of maybe a few foot slide, but then when you see a human being standing next to it, you get an idea of the scale of just how large these can be.
Hunting guides working for outfitter Cy Gilliland of Casper discovered the slide early last month. Apparently it started small and just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
The end of the hill just fell off.
State geologist Tom Dreen says the crack is impressive, but not dangerous.
It's not a problem for people. Certainly if you had cattle that you were running out there or something like that, yeah, it would impede their being able to cross the area, but there's no threat to infrastructure or people.
The guides who discovered the crack say it's still growing. It's now hundreds of yards long and at least 100 feet deep in places.
And before we go, let's take a look at some newly released NASA images of the sun. The U.S. Space Agency NASA released high-definition images taken by its space-based telescope, the Solar Dynamics Observatory. The observatory takes a high-resolution image of the sun every 12 seconds in 10 wavelengths of invisible ultraviolet light. Each wavelength helps to highlight a different temperature of solar material, and each is assigned a color. The images are then stitched together by a team of specialists who spend about 10 hours creating 1 minute of footage. The video shows several active regions of the sun, which are usually the source of solar storms. Magnetic field lines can be seen radiating from the surface and twisting into curves. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory is studying how solar activity is created and how space weather results from that activity.
In a year full of unusual weather events, this one ranks right up there. A powerful cyclone is about to slam into one of the most arid deserts in the world. Take a look. Well, this storm is churning towards an al-Qaeda-controlled city in Yemen. This is what it was like when it passed an island along the way.
Mexico's fire volcano is at it again, spewing ash into the sky twice in one morning. Authorities say the ash and smoke rose 2,200 meters, or 7,000 plus feet above the crater. While these eruptions weren't cause for evacuations, officials are warning residents to cover their faces and to be careful drinking water. Over the past few months, nearby villages have been blanketed with thick coats of ash, prompting evacuations. The fire volcano has been exhibiting continuous activity since July, leaving residents to wonder what's to come.
International travelers are playing a waiting game at the airport in Bali. Authorities closed the facility after Mount Rinjani on nearby Lombok Island began spewing volcanic ash. Nearly 700 flights have been canceled, leaving travelers like Peter Hermans cooling their heels.
We were first supposed to be flying out with Virgin Australia, then we got transferred to Singapore. Now Singapore cancelled also, so we fly tomorrow to Singapore and then we go to Perth.
But those plans may be a roll of the dice too. The volcano is still spewing ash, and officials say the potential for more eruptions is high.
According to Forbes, Vladimir Putin has been the most powerful person in the world for 3 years in a row. Before that, it was Barack Obama for 2 years in a row. But to be at the top of that list is not necessarily a compliment.
I think that the attitude inside the United States is changing rather dramatically towards President Putin. There may still be hostility, and I would even say a personal degree of jealousy on the part of President Obama and some of his key advisors. Among all of the world leaders, President Putin has demonstrated an ability to act decisively and in a timely fashion in response to the kinds of crises that other leaders have failed to respond to, or if anything, have been the provocateurs in starting the crises.
Here in the United States, the Russian president is viewed in a negative light more than anything. Covers of many newspapers and magazines reflect that. His impact on global crises, however, is being watched closely.
Putin having stamped his mark on the battlefield here with jets.
The Syrian dictator traveled out of Syria to visit Moscow to thank Vladimir Putin for bombing his enemies.
White House and NATO officials tell CNN they're concerned that Vladimir Putin and his army are violating their ceasefire agreement with Ukraine.
NATO is flexing its muscles with Operation Trident Juncture. It's the biggest military exercise in more than a decade. It involved more than a month of activities. And officials say they hope it will be a deterrent to Russia.
It's the largest and most ambitious NATO exercise in years, involving 36,000 troops from more than 30 nations, 140 aircraft and 60 warships. The military training has taken place in Spain, Italy and Portugal. It's designed to test the ability of Allied forces to work together. The scale of this operation is significant, and NATO's commanders hope it will not just act as a timely deterrent, but also underline NATO's capabilities. Russia's movement into Crimea and Ukraine led to these exercises increasing in both size and scope, with Russian observers invited to watch.
We see a new reality. We see new security challenges. And to the east, we see a more assertive Russia, which has been willing to use military force to change borders in Europe, destabilizing Ukraine. And therefore, NATO has to respond and to adapt. And that's exactly what we are doing.
NATO's other major concern is the instability in Syria and across North Africa, which has led to hundreds of thousands of migrants crossing the Mediterranean into Europe this year alone.
What's causing people to leave? What's President Assad? Killing his own people now for 4 years. And Russia, of course, has gone into Syria to prop up Assad before he falls so that they can retain their own foothold in there. Nothing good comes out of that.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said Tuesday that his country's main goal in Syria or any other place is to fight terrorism. Any attempt to scare Russia off would be futile. Putin made the remarks at the meeting with Dagestan scholars and public activists. He said Russia's fight against terrorism in Syria aims to help the Middle East avoid disasters and wars threatening the whole world. In his words, Moscow is willing to cooperate with any force to fight terrorism, no matter which party it represents. Who is the top existential threat to the United States? U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley said it is Russia. Mark Milley said that's because of Russia's military capabilities and U.S. uncertainties about Russia's political intent. At this week's Defense One conference held in Washington, D.C., Mark Milley characterized Russian behavior as adversarial to the interests of America, but would not call Russia an enemy. In July, the U.S. Army chief made similar remarks during his confirmation hearing before the U.S. Senate.
Russian warplanes pounded sites belonging to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front terrorist groups in the provinces of Homs, Hama, Latakia, Damascus, Aleppo and Raqqa. The Defense Ministry also said Russia's Air Force has struck the area around the Islamic State-held ancient city of Palmyra. The spokesperson reported that a fortification, an underground bunker and anti-aircraft artillery were destroyed as a result of a direct strike. And this is the first time that Russia has confirmed a strike close to the UNESCO World Heritage Site since Moscow denied Syrian state television claims that it hit the ancient city.
Vladimir Putin delivering a message of assurance to a grieving and fearful Russian public, as evidence mounts that ISIS may have brought down the airliner.
We will always be protecting your interests, especially in difficult, critical situations like Libya, Syria, or Yemen.
Putin wasn't ready to concede it was a terrorist act, but today the British Prime Minister left little doubt.
We cannot be certain that the Russian airliner was brought down by a terrorist bomb, but it looks increasingly likely that that was the case.
ISIS threatened Russia just last week, vowing revenge after Putin bombed the group's bases and weapons depots in Syria. Soon after the plane was ripped apart at 30,000 feet, ISIS claimed responsibility. In a subsequent video, an ISIS fighter with a message for Putin delivered in Russian.
One would like to congratulate our brothers from the Sinai Peninsula for having hit this damn plane.
I think there is a possibility that there was a bomb on board, and we're taking that very seriously. We know that the procedures we have here in the United States are different than some of the procedures that existed for outbound and inbound flights there, and we're going to spend a lot of time just making sure that our own investigators and our own intelligence community figures out exactly what's going on before we make any definitive pronouncements. But it is certainly possible that there was a bomb on board.
Right, Jake, aside from the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General, there was also another government watchdog group there, the Government Accountability Office. And the GAO essentially told Congress today many, not all, but many of TSA's screening methods in weeding out terrorists at airports. They're questioning how effective is it? And the reason why they're raising that question essentially is because they say that TSA themselves have not taken the time to analyze deeply their own process to determine, is everything that we're doing at the nation's airports working towards our mission, which is essentially to weed out every bad guy who shows up. Take a listen to what they said at the hearing earlier this morning.
TSA definitely is aware of the importance of ensuring their programs are effective. But at the end of the day, for GAO, it comes down to a very simple question, which is, does the program work, and how do you know?
What have we done to address these immediate challenges? Retrain the entire frontline workforce. I start with the junior-most person in this organization that's standing on a screening line, and I think about what it means for that individual to do their job effectively.
So here are some of the issues that the Government Accountability Office has with the agency. They say that TSA has not evaluated the effectiveness of new screening technologies. They also say TSA has no consistent performance measures for its Secure Flights program, which is essentially a program that allows them to match passengers' names against terror watch lists. And lastly, the GAO says that TSA has failed to use data to identify possibilities or areas for them to improve and strengthen the system. Jake, we should point out, you heard there from the TSA head, he says that he has retrained all of his frontline workers to address some of these issues, but he's also pushing back. He pointed out that every day TSA finds firearms at airport security checkpoints. Just last week, they found a record number of firearms. So they do know that there's work to be done, but they didn't want the point to be missed that they have prevented a lot of weapons from getting through airport security, Jake.
The international medical charity Doctors Without Borders has released an internal document reviewing the October 3rd airstrikes by U.S. forces on its hospital in northern Afghanistan. The MSF General Director, Christopher Stokes, said the attack was conducted with a purpose to kill and destroy. The internal review describes patients burning in their beds and others who were shot from the air while they fled the burning building. The report said there were no armed combatants or fighting within or from the hospital grounds. The document is based upon 60 debriefings of national and international employees of Doctors Without Borders. At least 30 people were killed in the U.S. airstrikes. The dead included 13 staff members and 10 patients. 7 bodies have yet to be identified. Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Ty Berry, who is an activist with Code Pink, and he's joining us live now from Washington via Skype. Now, Ty, this is the one story that seems not to be going away for the U.S. The details only seem to get worse. So what kind of pressure do you think this puts on the U.S. for accountability?
Well, without a doubt, this puts a lot of pressure on the Obama administration as far as external foreign affairs is considered. But the fact is that these war crimes have been going on since 2001, and they'll continue. Now the United States is putting boots on the ground in in Syria, and they're not leaving Afghanistan. The record shows that the United States has committed war crime after war crime. They support war criminals in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, and they are implicit in the blood and deaths of many, many people around this globe. And unless the world stands up and the people in the United States stand up and tell the United States that it can no longer permit the human rights violations, the mass murder that it's committing, and allow free and independent panels to investigate these things. These are all these war crimes are being investigated by the perpetrators.
Iran's president says that Israel is reaping the benefits of the continuation of insecurity and instability in the Middle East. Hassan Rouhani says that peace and security in the region would benefit all regional states, but work to the detriment of Israel. He said that Iran is ready for negotiations on regional issues on the condition that talks are aimed at bringing security and stability to the region. Iran's president called for a political solution in Syria, Yemen, and in Bahrain, adding that such a solution could only be found through constructive interaction. Rouhani said in case Saudi Arabia stops an intervention in neighboring Yemen, many problems would be resolved there. He made the comments in a meeting with the foreign ambassadors and heads of diplomatic missions to foreign countries.